Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Rediscovery Centre here in Dublin and to the ABC Economy Workshop. And welcome to everybody who's joining us online at home. You're very much welcome to the event today. It's the end of project event for the ABC Economy project. It's been mainly conducted by UCD and Crays played a minor part in the project. Also, the project collaborators were Monaghan and Tipperary County Council. The project was kindly funded by SEI and the Department of Agriculture and Food as well. So today's event, I'll just roughly run through the agenda. We'll have Dr. Fionnuala Murphy, who will give an overview of the project to date. Dr. Rosanna Keelan then will give us an overview of the results to date as well. And then Sean Douglas then will give us a presentation about AD and the economic analysis of it in Tipperary. After that, we'll have a Q&A. So if you are at home, if you have any questions, if you could just type into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And then after that, we'll have a panel discussion looking at a bioeconomy blueprint for a local authority. So once again, thanks you all for joining us here today. And now I'll hand you over to Dr. Fionnuala Murphy from UCD.
Thanks, Percy. Okay, can everyone hear me okay? All right. Okay, so thanks very much for coming today to the ABC Economy final event. So this project looks at developing sustainable value chains from waste. So what I'm going to do is give an overview of the rationale behind the project, what we were trying to do in the project, and Dr. Rosanna Keelan will provide the update on the results that we have to date. So this project is related to the bioeconomy. So when we think about the bioeconomy, essentially trying to produce value from biological resources. So doing this in a way that we can obtain bioproducts, we can obtain food, we can obtain feed, but also bioenergy as well. So essentially getting the maximum output from the biomass that we currently have. When we think about the bioeconomy, we also need to do it in a sustainable way so that we use better what we already use and that we also potentially use in the future processes and produce products from biomass that we don't use yet, but do it in a sustainable way. So really that would say biorefinery approach or cascading approach where we can produce a range of products from our single biomass users. So not just focusing on bioenergy. The cascading approach comes more into focus when we're considering the circular economy. So the bioeconomy is often viewed as the engine, the bioengine of the circular economy. So when we're designing sustainable value chains, which we aim to do in the ABC Economy project, we need to make sure that we are doing it in a way that we maintain the value of that biomass in the economy for as long as possible. So we're not just developing linear bio-based value chains that will replace linear fossil-based value chains, but that we consider the end of life of the product and how we can get value. So either keep the value in the economy, but also return the nutrients to the environment as well. So the cascading approach is very important so we can maximize value from the economy. If we are to implement the bioeconomy successfully, we can have significant benefits. So if we think about rural development, if we're developing our bio-based value chains on a local basis, we can have significant rural growth and rural redevelopment. This is a major goal of the European Union. By developing new value chains based on innovative processes, then that allows innovation, so provides opportunities for diversification of agricultural practices, for example, in Ireland, which will then lead to growth. And if we do it in a sustainable way, so by carrying out sustainability analysis at an early stage or as we're developing the bio-based value chains, we can then show what is the most sustainable way to develop these value chains, and that will help us to make sure that we are using our resources efficiently, make sure that we are reducing greenhouse gas emissions compared to the alternative fossil-based product. And if we can do that, then we can gradually move the society to a low-carbon society and reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. So that's, I suppose, the rationale behind the ABC Economy project. And in 2018, we saw a call from SEAI and Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, a co-funded project which looked at or called for topics in the area, projects in the area, to quantify the impact of the circular economy. In terms of the circular economy, it was specifically looking at the bioeconomy element. So, called for projects which would look at the full life cycle of the biomass resource. So, how we can utilise those biomass resources in a way that we can consider reduction of energy consumption, reduction of carbon emissions, and also, as I mentioned before, when we're considering the bioeconomy, production of bioproducts and bioenergy. So, considering a cascading approach for the bioeconomy. The project then, the call called for a project that would look at the market opportunities and look at quantifying the impacts of implementing these bio-based value chains. And dissemination was a key part of it as well. So make sure that we're disseminating the results of the project well. So we saw this call back in 2018, and we partnered with CRAE, the Composting and Anaerobic Digestion Association of Ireland, and also with Monaghan and Tipperary County Councils, to develop a project which would look at Monaghan and Tipperary and look at generating new bio-based value chains for those regions, looking at the sustainability of those bio-based value chains, basing it on a cascading approach, so we can extract the maximum value from the biomass in those two regions. The reasons, I suppose, for focusing on Monaghan and Tipperary, they're diverse agricultural areas with different agricultural processes in place in those areas. And what we wanted to do was look at the biomass resources that are generated there from the point of view of improving resource efficiency. So we decided to focus on agri-bio waste, so using better the resources that we're currently using. So focusing on biomass resources that aren't currently used to the maximum. And we'll have a look at that later on. So with the ABC Economy project as well, we also wanted to do the project in a way that this can be replicated across different areas as well. So put in place a methodology that we can prove for Tipperary and Monaghan, but can also provide a blueprint for other local authorities, for example. So the methodology that we followed in the project, we broke it up into 3 different work packages. The first one, and this is, I suppose, the basis of any bio-based value chain, we wanted to know what resources were available in the 2 regions. We wanted to know what the characteristics of those resources are to enable us to then be able to determine what possible products we can get from those biomass resources. So we carried out the feedstock assessment and the characterization of those feedstocks. When we're considering the potential use of biomass within the bioeconomy, it's important to look at the current market, so the current uses of those biomass resources. They could be used in a way that's currently beneficial, and we don't necessarily want to divert that away into other uses which may prove to be unsustainable. So it's important to consider what the current use is. A key element of this part of the work package was our first workshop, which was held back in 2019, so it seems like a long time ago now. I'll discuss that workshop in a couple of minutes. So once we had our biomass resource base determined for the 2 regions, then the next thing was to look at the technology potential. So Dr. Rosanna Kleeman carried out an analysis of all potential technologies and processes that could be used to generate value from the biomass resources in the 2 regions. And she'll present some of those results later on. And a key part of this element of this work package was the sustainability assessment. So coming back to the call, we were to quantify the impact of implementing these bio-based value chains. So that involves looking at the life cycle assessment of implementing these value chains. So that's the piece of work that's ongoing. We've looked at anaerobic digestion in both regions, and Rosanna will be looking at the additional value chains in the coming months. The final part of the final work package was around market uptake. So the stakeholder assessment and integration in the project was very important. So what we wanted to do was present the value chains to relevant stakeholders, both in Monaghan and Tipperary. So we did this in January in an online workshop, and we got very positive results, which I will very quickly go over. So this, I suppose, methodology we felt could be proven for Monaghan and Tipperary, and carried out analysis through case studies for the two regions, and then further expanded potentially beyond the project to inform other local authorities. So I'll just give some context around the two counties in terms of the agricultural processes, the background for agriculture in the two regions, which then leads, I suppose, to the potential biomass availability in the two regions. So if we look, we have both Monaghan and Tipperary here in terms of the numbers of animals in both counties. So you can see there's a clear difference. In Monaghan, there'd be a lot more poultry, versus Tipperary, there'd be more cattle. Still, the output, I suppose, is litter or manure. So in the case of Monaghan, a significant bioresource would be the poultry litter. In the case of Tipperary, a significant resource would be the manure. In the case of Monaghan as well, there is a certain amount of cattle, so again gives rise to cattle manure in the region. And in Tipperary, then there'd be a reasonable amount of pigs as well. But when we consider the animal production in both counties, that leads to bioresources that we can use, for example, in anaerobic digestion. So looking beyond animal production in both regions, we also looked at the crop production in both regions and forestry in both regions. So you can see for Monaghan, a significant focus would be on mushrooms. So from the point of view of the bioeconomy, there can be spent mushroom compost, for example, which can be utilised in the bioeconomy, but we can also utilise digestate in mushroom production. So the mushroom area gives us a good opportunity to put in place circular bioeconomy approaches based on, I suppose, the numbers of the quantity of mushrooms being cultivated in Monaghan. If we consider Tipperary, there's more of a focus on grains. So if we consider grain production, there's associated straw production. So that essentially is the biomass that we can consider as potentially available for the bioeconomy in Tipperary. We also have forestry as well, so you can see mainly conifers in Tipperary. Monaghan has both, but at lower levels. So if we're considering forestry resources, there are co-products coming from forestry that we can potentially use in the bioeconomy. So Rosanna will give a bit more detail on the biomass resources in her presentation later, but this just gives an overview of the context in both regions. So as I mentioned, our stakeholder engagement was very important in this project. We needed to hear from stakeholders in both regions, people who are actively involved in the regions in terms of the agricultural processes, and we can learn from their experiences. So we carried out 2 workshops in 2019 in Tipperary and Monaghan, and these workshops were at the early stage of the project, and they focused on learning about the opportunities that people see within the regions, and also focusing on the barriers that they also see. We wanted to take this learning from the point of view of considering feedstocks, logistics, markets, and knowledge, and use that to develop, I suppose, our project and focus our results based on this workshop. So it was very interesting, lively discussions at both workshops, and people had a lot to say, which was really great. When it came to the feedstocks, the stakeholders felt it was very positive that there's significant potential for utilisation of biomass in both regions. They said that there was excess manure, and if we can extract value from the manure, then they can see a significant economic benefit. They felt that there was opportunities to develop local bio-based value chains, which they saw as beneficial for the region as well. And they also touched on the environmental benefits, so improving carbon sequestration, improving return of nutrients to the soil as well. However, there was also barriers when it came to feedstocks, so lack of knowledge on the quantities of feedstocks available and characterization of those feedstocks. When it came to logistics then, the opportunities were very much around, again, making value chains more local, so you're not transporting products over long distances. They felt that if you can reduce transport distances, you'd have a significant environmental benefit. So what they wanted to see was local value chains developed in each region. However, they felt disrupting current transport processes or practices could be difficult. I suppose the situation in terms of fuel prices has changed, but back in 2019, it was felt that there was no real incentive to keep things local. That could be a different thing. In terms of the market, the stakeholders felt that cooperative systems could be a way to develop the bioeconomy. So, for example, that would allow communities to come together to achieve the necessary scale for these bio-based value chains. We also felt that there should be increased opportunities for matchmaking. So, basically to match producers, biomass producers in each of the regions to potential users of that biomass. So that's something that we felt was quite interesting. In terms of the market, there was lots of barriers also spoken about as well, particularly around lack of funding, the costs of these new potential costs of new bio-based value chains. But also then a key barrier which we picked up on was changing the mindsets, so changing public perception around bio-based value chains and the bioeconomy, especially when you're considering usage of waste products. So from those barriers then, that kind of led into the knowledge and communication aspect. So the stakeholders in the area felt that there needed to be more information about potential bio-based value chains. So easy to understand, short fact sheets, for example, to allow users in the area to get the information about potential bio-based value chains. This would then hopefully help develop the knowledge base in the country, and particularly on a regional basis. So the knowledge and communication, I suppose, is something that we're hoping the ABC Economy Project and our outputs will help to provide information for Monaghan and Tipperary on potential bio-based value chains. So based on workshop 1, then we went away, developed potential value chains, and Rosanna's going to talk about that later. And we came back in January just gone and had an online event where Rosanna presented a number of value chains, and we got the feedback from stakeholders in both Monaghan and Tipperary, asking things about their opinion whether the particular value chains were feasible. A lot of them felt that they were. Whether it appealed as a concept, they were very positive about that. And then we also asked them if they would be willing to implement parts or all of the value chains that Rosanna proposed as well. And again, we got a very favourable response there. Most people said they would, some people said they might do it. In terms of the potential output, so Rosanna presented a number of products coming from the value chains, and there was a significant impact or interest in the biogas produced. And that was something that we felt was interesting, and also the digestate and the fertilizers as well. And Rosanna will give a bit more detail about this later. So overall, the value chains were very positively received, and that's allowed us then to go on further and carry a techno-economic assessment and life cycle assessment of those value chains. So today, we'll have 2 parts, as Percy mentioned, to the event. So Dr. Rosanna Kleeman will present the results from the ABC Economy research work to date, and Sean Douglas from Bioorbic will present his work on techno-economic assessment of anaerobic digestion. So it will present to you some of the technical aspects and the economic aspects around the ABC Economy value chains. After that, then we'll have our panel discussion. So myself and Rosanna will be joined by Patrick Barrett from the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, and PJ McLaughlin from Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. And then we'll have a discussion. We'll present our innovation blueprint for the bioeconomy, and it would be great to get your feedback on that. So thanks very much for coming out today, everyone here in the Rediscovery Centre, and everyone joining us online as well. You can follow us on Twitter and keep an eye on our website. Now is the critical time to find out the results of the Economy Summit. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Rosanna.
Thank you, Fionnuala, for giving that overview and that introduction to the project. For everybody at online, if you have any questions, if you could just type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do questions and answers at the end when all the presentations have been given. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Rosanna Kielman, who has been doing the majority of all the work. So Rosanna, over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Percy. Is that better? Yes, that's better. Yes, so as Percy mentioned, I'm Dr. Rosanna Clayman. I'm the postdoc working on this project. And it's the project has started in 2018 actually began, and then I had a maternity leave in the middle, so that's what extended out. If you're wondering how the dates happened so long, that was my fault. I was lucky enough to have a lot of master's students helping with the project along the way, and a few interns as well. So a lot of kudos goes to other people. It wasn't all just me alone working on it, which I obviously really appreciate any extra help that I get with anything. So Fionnuala kind of mentioned there what we kind of lay out of the project. So those sort of three main sections of the project. The first one was quantifying and characterising all the biomass waste that we have in Tipperary and Monaghan. Then the next part was looking at different technologies that could be used to get the best value out of those wastes. And then we had obviously workshops in between and kind of adjusted things depending on the feedback we got from everybody. And now we're on kind of the final stretch of the project. So very early on, I created supply chains. So this looked at, this one is in particular is for livestock. Don't worry, you don't really have to take in too much information from that. They're very small. But it's just to give an idea that we looked at the whole supply chain for cattle, poultry, sheep and pigs were quite similar, so they're kind of lumped into one. Just to see in Ireland specifically where all the waste is arising for animals. And where it's already being used, and we know how to target then any waste. So I kind of thought maybe there would have been more waste in livestock, but actually I did a few site visits and I could see lots of waste was being reused in all kinds of clever ways. One notable example is Silverhill Duck Farm up in Monaghan. I think everyone knows they produce down duvets, and they have been doing that for I think over 20 years. So that's something that I thought could have been a waste, but they were already using it 20 years ago to make really high value duvets. And I think nearly everything else has been used. But one of the main things we find with livestock is the manure. It always comes back to manure is one of the main things that's never really being utilised properly. We did the same exercise then for wheat and barley. Again, there's kind of some things, actually most things actually are really being used very well in most areas, I think. But then we did some more analysis and then found areas that we could intervene and can use things in a better way. So wheat and barley, again, being used pretty well. Oats and mushrooms, and we all kind of know the spent mushroom compost is one of the main outputs from mushrooms. So every kilogram of mushrooms produced, 5 kilograms of spent mushroom compost is produced. So that's a huge amount of resources that we can use. Obviously, a lot of it is being used, but I think sometimes we can refine and use things in a better way, more high value way. That's what this project is aiming to do: is always get the highest value first out of biomass waste, and then look at what we can do after that as well. And then forestry waste, again, a lot of it is being used the best that it can be, but then sometimes there's maybe too much waste for one waste stream as well. So we quantified a lot of this. So we obviously looked at characteristics then, because when we're looking at different technologies that we can apply to the waste, we need to know, well, what does the waste even look like? So one of the main things we know in manure and litter would be a lot of nutrients. So you can see kilograms per ton of manure. Ducks and poultry, they produce actually quite a lot of nutrients for what you get per ton. And then the moisture content is obviously quite high for a lot of these animals. I think I would have thought that the cattle would have had higher nutrient content than anything else, but they really didn't. Goes to show you, I was have to do your research. We also looked at methane and N2O emissions as well. So we could see the impact of our interventions before and after we put in technologies then. So a lot of this will come up in the life cycle assessment that I'm working on right now. So you can see then, this is for Tipperary and Monaghan, and obviously dairy cows are, we kind of know that they would be responsible for a lot of methane emissions in agriculture. But it's interesting to see, it's like particularly the dairy cows are producing the most amount. And then in Monaghan, known for a lot of poultry production, they obviously have lots of N2O emissions. So that kind of gives another area that we know, okay, maybe we can impact the N2O emissions by applying a technology that can reduce that as well. So we're always trying to do the best that we can do using the information that we have. And then again, some of the nutrient characteristics. Obviously, mushroom compost will contain a lot as well, a lot more than oat straw. Seems to barely have anything really. And moisture contents obviously vary quite a lot between those. Mushroom compost will be quite high. And then for whatever reason, barley straw is quite high. A lot of this is averages from the Phyllis website database, and we used this early on in the project. And then again, comparing all the different types of wood, all the different forests that we have in Ireland, and then it's mostly calcium that is contained in a lot of the wood that we have available. So that's another thing that we could probably target with a specific technology to remove the calcium and put that to a better use as well. Then we were lucky enough, we got a lot of information from ICT Biochain project up in Kerry. I can't remember what Kerry have called themselves now because they keep changing. But they very helpfully shared a lot of the information that they had. They were kind of mapping all across Ireland, all the biomass wastes in Ireland, and then they shared with me information specific for Tipperary and Monaghan. So you can see then with the animal manures, a lot of it is being applied to land. A lot of poultry litter is being used for mushroom compost. So then that's where we thought, okay, a lot of it is going to land. Do we even have the land bank capacity for all of this manure? So that's where we thought, okay, well, we can intervene there and divert some of the manure away from land and kind of get a higher value from it, a higher value technology. And then the same again we did for crops. So a lot of the crops then are being used for bedding and feed, mushroom compost land, and then there was a section that's not being used at all. So we knew that's the spent mushroom compost that we know isn't being used. So obviously that's a place we know we can intervene and take that junk and then apply technology to that and to get the best value out. And then again, forestry waste, so board mills, obviously energy, stake, land, and animal bedding. So we've kind of thought, well, around the kind of land, energy, we can kind of take sections out of this and apply this in a better way. So then I did some kind of scenario analysis, so looking at BAU, business as usual. So if we just took what we had available now, how much could we recover then that would be available for recovery for applying the technologies when we decide what technologies we're going to use? So 1% of cattle and sheep manure is easy enough to collect. Pig manure would be a higher percentage, and poultry litter. It's just based off of how the animals are housed in the two counties. So obviously kind of cattle are a bit more kind of roaming around the field, so it's harder to collect all their manure compared to pig manure. They kind of are housed in sheds a bit more. And then poultry litter, again, they're much more easy to collect a lot of their manure. And then the mushroom compost, we can get access to 100% of that. Then 50% will go to land, some of it mushroom offcuts then to land, and then straw, we thought, okay, maybe we could collect about 50% of that. And then the same again with the forest biomass to land and energy. So this is some of the forestry waste that will be left on the floor of the forest, then what can we collect as well. So then we thought, okay, that's the business as usual. This is the amount that we could just, if we didn't really change the systems at all, this is how much biomass we'd have available in the two counties. And then based off of, there was an SEI report. So we kind of could increase then the amount of biomass that we could recover based off of different things in this report. So if we created a cooperative model, then we can recover much more cattle and sheep manure, 8% compared to 1%. We could recover a lot more pig manure, 71% compared to 46%. And then straw, we could collect a lot more straw as well. And this is also based off of people banding together to put all their biomass waste in one place. So it's a kind of, I think the takeaway from this is that usually cooperative models do work a bit better to increase the amount of biomass we can recover, and then obviously you get better returns on investment the more that you're treating as well. So that's what we had found kind of from people telling us this at the first workshop, and then obviously the data kind of supports the same as well. Then obviously you have to look at so many different technologies to figure out what works best with the biomasses that we've identified based off of their characteristics as well. So this is just a smaller snapshot of all the different technologies I looked at. I categorized them just by if they're biochemical, biological, chemical or physical, and thermochemical. And then, so I looked at the limitations, the benefits, the moisture contents that would be required. Could they be decentralized systems or centralized systems? Do they need pre-treatment, post-treatment, any other refinement? Is there any other kind of nitrous oxide gases coming from it, anything else? So that was all, I got one big Excel with all of this in, if anybody wants a lot of detail on that. So then there was sort of a few main that stood out to us that we used for the project. So anaerobic digestion, which we've already mentioned a good bit already. A few of the chemical ones, like acid leaching, fractionation, precipitation, they can be used in a cascading system kind of towards the end of the system, so they jumped out at us as well. And then pyrolysis is kind of, I think it's kind of getting its time now, pyrolysis, I think it's kind of becoming more popular. So we also looked at that. And then in the previous workshop, lots of people asked, well, why aren't we considering these ones? So I've improved. And I put down little notes about, like, kind of, a lot of it was off of my own instinct. So I do a lot of technology reviews, and I have done for the European Commission. So I think I kind of do know what I'm talking about sometimes here, which is nice to know. So the enzymatic hydrolysis is purely just because of the cost of the technology, and it requires a pre and post treatment. We were trying to avoid pre-treatment of the manures or the biomass wastes and post-treatment, especially if we're trying to do a cooperative model. If everybody has to pre-treat their biomass, how can you guarantee somebody is definitely doing it? How can you definitely guarantee that it's of the same quality as somebody else's? So if we can avoid that step at all, I think it's better off for the cooperative systems. Fermentation, I couldn't see how it would fit into a cascading system. So ultimately, that's what we're trying to do, is a cascading system. And I just couldn't get my head around how that would work, unless anybody has any other ideas, tell me. Again, trans-esterification requires a pre-treatment that'll be expensive. Aeration is notoriously energy, use up a huge amount of energy. I think in England, I had heard that about 1% of the energy usage is just for aeration of wastewater treatment works. That's the number I had back in the day. Biofiltration is not really being used very much. I also looked at the kind of the technology readiness levels of the technologies. So if anything was too low, just kind of lab-based or barely a demo site, then I kind of discounted it, because it could be years before it's actually a viable option for Ireland. Composting, we all love composting, but I couldn't see how it fits in a cascading system either. The physical processes, they were quite simple, but just the outputs didn't seem like they could be used in a cascading system either. Gasification requires a post-treatment, and there's limited studies for manures. All the hydrothermal, gasification, carbonization, liquefaction, they're not really suitable for cascading systems, from what I could see. I think standalone, they're very good technologies, but I just can't see them working for a cascading system. Incineration, obviously air emissions, the fly ash can be difficult to use, and usually pyrolysis is seen as like a better alternative to incineration. And then torrefaction requires a really dry feedstock that just wouldn't really be achievable in Ireland, I think, sometimes given our weather and the storage as well. So then the ones that stood out to us, AD, obviously has been proven a lot. You can use lots of different feedstocks. It produces very useful byproducts that already have a market. A lot of these chemical, the acid leaching, fractionation, precipitation, they can be part of a cascading system at the latter part of the cascade, and then they produce really good byproducts, but they can be expensive. You can kind of take them or leave them as well, depending on how high value you want your products to be. And then pyrolysis is again a proven technology and can use so many different feedstocks, and it has a small footprint as well, which is handy for planning on sites. So this is the technology concept we came up with for manure and poultry litter. We presented this at the second workshop. So you can see we have AD, and the solid digestate from that goes into pyrolysis. Then we'll have the biochar, which then contains loads of nutrients, particularly phosphorus from manure. And then we could do some acid leaching from that, and then precipitate a really nice product, distributed fertilizer, which would be a high value product. So that was one option. Then we obviously asked everybody, what do you think about these options, and what ones were the the products that stood out to everybody. So the products would be the liquid digestate, which is a fertilizer, biogas, bio-oil, activated carbon, and struvite, struvite fertilizer. And mostly then we saw what Fionnuala was talking about there earlier on, that the biogas was kind of one of the main products that people were interested in. So we kind of put more focus on that then for the next part of the project. And then a technology chain for forestry, crop residues, or spent mushroom compost involved fractionation, followed by pyrolysis, followed by AD. And again, it was mostly biogas that people were interested in. I think there wasn't as much interest in the cellulose, hemicellulose from what we could see, and from follow-up with people after the workshop as well. So then we thought, well, maybe we'll just simplify the whole thing. I asked a few people what they thought after the workshop, and some said, well, with the cascading systems, it's difficult. If you have too many systems, one after another, then if one system goes down, you're just left with a big backlog. And how do you store that? Does everything need to be a batch process? Or how logistically, there's a lot of logistics around how do you make a fully cascading system work? I think they definitely can work. I think if you have kind of maybe a closer knit bunch of people all doing it, and everyone knows, okay, like this system, they'll definitely have the biomass of a particular dryness, they'll definitely have the lignin produced that we can put into the pyrolysis. But then just to simplify things as well for ourselves and for the life cycle assessments, we looked at a simplified version. So just AD and pyrolysis. We're looking at putting AD first, followed by pyrolysis, because then you can pyrolyze the digestate, get biochar, bio-oil, biogas. And then by doing this, the digestate can just be used again. Instead of, you could put the solid digestate straight on land, but again, there's questions around the nutrient land bank. We could be inhibiting, there could be too much nutrients already in the soil. So then if we pyrolyze it, then we can get some additional product out of this. And then we also looked then at doing pyrolysis first, followed by AD, because there's reports that if you put biochar into AD, then it increases the biogas output. So then these are the options that we're looking at for the life cycle assessment. That's what I'm working on right now. And then we're also working on some more economic analysis. We have Sean, who's kindly stepped up to talk about AD in Tipperary, so he can kind of go into a bit more detail around that. But that's what I'm working on now, is more of the economic analysis. I just didn't have it in a good enough place to show anyone today. So just some notes about AD and pyrolysis in Ireland. I think they're becoming more and more popular. I also said AD was really popular in the UK, just for various different reasons, and I think that it's going to be more popular in Ireland. There's 30 AD plants in Ireland, most of them, I think it was 11 or something, 10 are used for sewage sludge treatment, and then all the rest is kind of agricultural and other commercial uses. Obviously, we know they produce biogas, which a lot of our stakeholders have a lot of interest in producing biogas, especially now considering kind of energy prices and access to energy, all that. And then also just we're producing more fertilizer and our own source of fertilizer within Ireland instead of importing all our fertilizers from abroad. It's always much better if we can produce our own. We know it produces renewable energy we can use on site, fertilizers. We're pretty sure it'll have good environmental benefits, producing our own biogas, and will reduce greenhouse gas emissions over time then. We're still quite low in AD deployment, but hopefully we can convince more people today to talk about AD to more people and entice everyone into it. Some of the questions around like decentralized or centralized systems, I think for most technologies, we know it's already being used a good bit in Ireland. And then pyrolysis is definitely becoming a lot more popular, mostly because of the outputs that it produces. You can use biochar in so many different ways. You can kind of adjust the system to produce more or less biogas, biochar, bio-oil, depending on what it is that you want your outputs to be or what your inputs are as well. So that's just the end of my presentation now. Thanks everyone for coming today. I really appreciate it. I know that the last workshop was relatively recently, but sure, these things have to happen sometimes. So I'll hand back over to Percy, who'll pass over to Sean. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosanna, for giving us a kind of a good flavour of the results to date. So it's very interesting to your findings. If there's any questions for anybody at home, please type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And now I'll introduce you to our next speaker, who is Sean Douglas from Biorbic in UCD. And Sean, very much welcome to the stage. I'll hand over to you now.
Thanks, Percy. That's great. So hello, everyone. So Sean's my name. I'm with Biorbic Bioeconomy Research Centre. So I was looking at the market potential component linked to the ABC Economy project. So looking at agricultural biomass, what's available, and also looking at the circular models around that. So looking at anaerobic digestion in Tipperary. I know we've a Tipperary man in the house, so I'm interested to hear the results of this. So just a national context, Ireland's in a very unique position in terms of biomass. So 2/3 of our land is agricultural land, over 90% of which is under grass. So we're in a very unique position. Also, we've 1.5 cows for every person in the country. Again, putting us in quite a unique position. I think it's the 5th highest cattle herd in Europe. We've 1% of the population in Europe. So looking at Tipperary, as we saw in Rosanna and Nuala's presentations, Tipperary is has a large cattle herd. So we're looking at AD of cow slurry and grass silage in Tipperary. Just looking at the energy targets to 2020, we've actually done quite well over the last 2 years. We're quite good for electricity generation. The thermal heat is one we have to crack, and we've achieved our targets in transport as well. So we do have large, up to 80% of our electricity is looking to come from renewable resources. So as we know, anaerobic digestion, it comes from renewable biomass that's bio-based. So anaerobic digestion, I feel, has a role to play in our renewable energy targets. Looking at Ireland, we're unique in terms of the biomass, but we're also unique in terms of the size of the country. We have actually a very extensive natural gas network. So compared to a country, for example, like Sweden, which is 6 times the size of Ireland, we actually have a very extensive network. Looking at another country that has large amounts of cattle, Germany is 5 times the size of Ireland. Now, bear in mind, I did this project, these are kind of 2019 numbers. So Germany has about just under 900 times more anaerobic digestion plants than we have, but it's 5 times the size, and it has 2,500 times more energy produced from those anaerobic digestion plants. Germany, I think the key kind of number here, the anaerobic digestion within Germany over a 16-year period grew 6-fold. Now that was linked to attractive feed-in tariffs. So that could be something that we could replicate in Ireland. I think feed-in tariffs and incentives was a key component to the thesis itself. So then looking at Tipperary itself, so we looked at 10 rural districts, and there are AGIs, or above ground installations, in those rural districts in Tipperary. The transport distances were optimized, so the maximum, as you can imagine, transport costs feature heavily in the profitability and market potential of any anaerobic digestion facility. So looking at minimizing the transport distances was key. So the maximum transport distance was 32.5 kilometers, and the minimum was 6.2. So it's probably a little bit too small to see the detail on that. Looking at the profitability, the lifespan of the anaerobic digester facility sites was 20 years, real discount rate of 8%. We're looking at 3 plant sizes, so 50,000, 75,000, and 100,000 tons processed per annum. Then 2 volatile solid ratios, basically 2 mixing ratios of cow slurry to grass silage, and then looking at feedstock prices of grass silage. So €19, €33, and €47 per ton. At the time that I was doing this thesis, the base price for natural gas per megawatt hour was €20. Now, as we all look at our electricity bills, we see that the price of everything has increased substantially. So I was looking at that base price of €20 and 2 incentive levels on top of that. So one was €60 per megawatt hour and the other one was €100 per megawatt hour. To put into context, last year, the base price for natural gas was anywhere between €70 and €117 per megawatt hour. So I suppose the point I'm making is, while there was incentives was a key component to the profitability of anaerobic digestion, when I did the project, the prices of natural gas have arguably somewhat overtaken the need for incentives. So it really increases the profitability potential of anaerobic digestion in Tipperary. Just looking at the results, essentially there were 3 grass silage prices. So we can see here in the incentive level of €60 per megawatt hour, and with the feedstock cost of €47, the anaerobic digestion facilities were not profitable in Thurles. When the incentive level was €100, so the total price, shall we say, per megawatt hour was €120, even at the highest feedstock cost for silage, these plants were profitable. Also, the profitability increased as the price of the feedstock cost went down, as you can imagine. So just looking overall, the bigger kind of picture viewpoints, profitability increased as the incentive level increased. So at that overall kind of market price of €120 per megawatt hour, all facilities were profitable. No matter, even at the highest feedstock cost, even at the lowest volatile solid mixing ratio, even at the highest transport distance, they were all profitable, some very much so. Profitability increased as the grass silage cost decreased. So when at the €60 incentive level, grass, the silage feedstock cost was the key limiting factor. I believe there was only one site that was profitable at the highest feedstock cost of €47 per tonne. As the plant size increased, profitability increased, so there was a kind of economies of scale benefit to increase plant size, and also the profitability increased as the mixing ratio of grass silage to cow slurry increased. And as you can imagine, as the transport distance decreased, the profitability increased as well. So for all scenarios, at that €100 incentives, all the anaerobic digestion facilities were profitable. And also for the medium scenario, the profitability ranged from 5.4 to 8 million over the 20-year period. And that was a total transport distance of 20.5 kilometers. It's actually quite high. It's 10 kilometers for cow manure and 10.5 kilometers for grass silage. The incentives are very important, or they were at the time. I think the overall price is the message to kind of get across now, that the prices per megawatt hour have increased hugely. They've been twofold at least in the last 2-3 years. And yeah, there's benefits, I think, in addition to, as Fionnuala and Rosanna said, there's benefits in addition to the biogas that was produced. It's also a benefit for reducing pathogen load, odor management, and also the nutrient kind of management on farm, and in addition to emissions reductions. So thank you very much. Yeah, if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I'd just like to invite Sean, Fionnuala and Rosanna, if you'd like to come up here and take a seat here, and then we'll do the Q&A session then with everybody. So I'll just grab that seat there, Sean, if you don't mind. Yeah. I have to juggle a few things here. So if anybody's any questions at home, please type into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And I suppose, first of all, I'll open up to the floor here in the room. If anybody's any questions, if they could just raise their hand, introduce who you are and where you're from, and I'll hand you the microphone. So if there's any questions, Claire?
Hi, Claire Downey. I'm the Research Policy Director here at the Rediscovery Centre. It has always struck me as quite odd that Germany has done so much with grass silage AD, and we haven't seen the takeoff that they've seen there. And just wondering, is it the feed-in tariffs that is the reason why AD hasn't seen the same promise or realization as it has in Germany? And is this new energy pricing going to be the game changer, or are there other things that have prevented it from developing here?
Thanks. Great question. I think there's two main reasons why I think that Germany, say compared to Ireland, they've increased so much the AD sector. I think the first is the price. So it now is becoming more economically kind of viable now to look at this. I knew I forgot to mention something during the presentation. The rationale for the thesis was looking at resources first and then looking at the plant sizes second. So there is ample cow manure in Tipperary, even to expand the anaerobic digestion in the county. The grass silage, there is a debate, is there enough grass silage actually for anaerobic digestion? And the thesis showed that there was, provided that grassland management practices were employed, so maximum nitrogen fertilizer. I think the number was 14 tons of dry matter per hectare, but the results showed that there is enough grass silage there. I think from a policy point of view, one key difference between Ireland and Germany is that Ireland is allows the spread of untreated manure on the land. And so I think in Germany, they've even tightened up further that it has to be treated first of all, but also all the phosphorus has to be recovered out of it, and new industries have popped up overnight as a result of that. So there is a policy component to it, but I think that's definitely feeds into looking at what are as Rosanna said, the highest value uses for the biomass.
Okay.
Padraig Fleming from Gas Networks Ireland. Well, maybe one comment first and then a question. I think there's an interesting study by Devonish and KPMG last year which talks about the quantities of grass and feed-in stock that is available in Ireland. I think it was published autumn last year. But my question is, in relation to ADs, have you considered kind of revenues or incomes from digestate? So I know you were looking at the kind of revenues and subsidies and that, but do you have any measure or sense of what the revenues might be from selling digestate, or is that an offset against what's paid for grass to farmers, or how would that work?
I think no is the short answer. I think the study that I looked at was the manure was got free from the farmers and the digestate was provided back for free. So I think the business case could be around the grass silage, the cost that's associated with that, so that could be a benefit for farmers. But it wasn't Richard O'Shea in UCC. My study was based on his research, and I think Ian Kilgallen was kind of linked to that research. So their logic was to get the manure in at no cost, but give the digestate back to the farmers at no cost either.
Yeah, I just know in Cray, in our technical committee, that's on our agenda, trying to put an economic value to digestate in a current climate where we all know that any fertilizing type products in Ireland have a higher value than they were maybe 6 months ago. So definitely it's something that's on our agenda, both for compost and digestate, trying to show the true economic value of it based on the nutrient content as well as the carbon sequestration properties as well. We have another question here in the audience.
I'm Jack McCarthy, research officer here at Community Studies.
Is Mike on there?
Is that working? Yeah, sorry. Particularly during Fanula's presentation at the start, I was thinking of the metrics through which we report on national material consumption, national material reuse. I was just wondering if that was part of this part. If there's, first of all, challenges in measuring this kind of thing at a national level, reporting that, and then if that was considered as part of this project.
Yeah, absolutely. I might actually hand over to Rosanna. That was one of the key things she found when doing the assessment, the difficulties around getting data.
Yeah, I did find that really difficult trying to get some of the data on a granular level for Tipperary Monaghan was really, really difficult. And then now we're waiting for the results from the census from 2020, the Census of Agriculture from 2020. So I want to update all the information based off of that new census. They've had some preliminary data already published in like December gone. There hasn't been any real updates on it. I think with any kind of project that's based off of research and data, just getting the data in the first place is always a difficulty. And we had a meeting with SEAI. We kind of raised that as an issue, just finding data, and that maybe some more projects should be done around actually getting data off people so we can use them for projects of this type.
And just feeding off of that, with some of the methodologies used here, essentially feed into improving the data reporting of
yeah, I think it definitely will. And then we even got some data from other people who were kind of doing this on a national level as well. So the ICT biochain is one of the main sources of information. And then during Bioeconomy Week, there was that map made. It was on, what was the name of that?
The Bioeconomy Ireland map.
Okay, sorry, Bioeconomy Ireland. I was trying to think of the name of it earlier on. Yeah, so there's a few things already in place that we can get data from, and then it just depends on the project itself, how granular you need that to be. And then obviously most researchers are very happy to share data with everyone else because we know it's hard finding data. So if you ever want to reach out to anybody, then you can do.
Okay, any more questions from the floor?
Hi, thanks. I'm Tony from Cray. You were looking at the cascading model, whereas what we've seen about whole digestate going to land is essentially non-cascading. So, and the answer to the question about the cost of digestate or the value, in the UK we're seeing it now at -£8 a tonne. And that's before we consider the environmental impacts of methane, soil and nitrous oxide. So in your cascading model, have you looked at the economic comparison to the linear model and the environmental differences of producing biochar and what you can get from all of that?
Yes, that's definitely something I'm looking at now, is the economic impacts of doing cascading versus just linear. My feeling would be that if you're if instead of just taking it at gestation, putting it straight on land, that if you're recovering the phosphorus out of it in some way or getting more energy out of it, then it can be sold at a higher value as a more refined product. It wouldn't be a waste product anymore. You probably could even get it certified as a whole new product if you had like REACH registration on that product. So I think then it probably would stack up using a cascading system instead.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so that's currently where Rosanna's at the moment. We refined the value chains based on the feedback from our last workshop in January. And now, so Sean's work was, I suppose, at an earlier part of the project, where we looked at, I suppose, pieces of the value chain in isolation, we'll say, towards then doing the analysis for the cascading model, which Rosanna is working on now, doing the economics and the environmental life cycle assessment as well.
Yeah, I think one thing I forgot to mention is obviously you can produce biochar from the pyrolysis, and that can be used as an activated carbon, which has, I'm not sure of the numbers anymore, but that has really high value and can be used across so many different industries. So that's something I just need to look into, like what industries could use it at what value as well.
Any more questions from the floor? Okay, we'll move to the questions online. There's a few questions coming in, so if you guys are at home, just please keep sending your questions. So the first question I have is from John Durkin, and he's asking, if grass silage was not available, is AD still profitable at 120 euros a tonne? So Sean, would you be able to have a go at answering that?
So yeah, it's a very good question. I think, and it links to that conversation of, well, you know, is there enough grass silage available for to kind of mix in with the cow slurry? So the research shows that, research from the US in particular shows that it can be profitable. The size of the herd is very important. So if you have, it becomes profitable at 3,000 cattle. The herd size would have to be 3,000 cattle or more. Now, as you can imagine, in the US, it's much more intensive farming versus extensive in Ireland. But theoretically, yes, it is. But the herd size has to be much larger than the average in Ireland. So we could feed into the co-op model that Nuala and Rosanna talked about.
Okay. Next question I have is from Dan Hayes in Calignas. So Dan is asking, spent mushroom compost was mentioned as a feedstock and is plentiful in Ireland, but it is very challenging composition. What technologies do you think are suitable for valorizing it? So I think Rosanna, this one is for you.
One of the main things that stood out was fractionation. You can get lignin then from it. But then from our workshop, we didn't have as many people interested in the sort of lignin cellulose, hemicellulose compared to the biogas. So that's why we kind of focused a bit more on that. But then we know also we had a presentation from the Fungus Chain project at the last workshop. I think they were doing fermentation, precision fermentation, I think, to valorize the spent mushroom compost there as well. I can't remember all the products they were getting out of it, but there seemed to be a lot of products they were producing from the spent mushroom compost there. I think even part of it was going into cosmetics. I don't know, if you look like you know more.
Yeah, if I remember right, that is the BioRescue EU-funded project, and they would have been looking at I think, parts of the mushroom stock and stuff to see what other added value products they could get out of that. So there's details on that, and I think it's biorescue.eu is the website. I suppose with spent mushroom compost, there's a lot of renewed interest in it. I suppose in Ireland at the moment, I was trying to see, is it a potential feedstock that could be further composted to use in peat replacement as well, and that's certainly something that a number of companies I think are looking at the moment as people are looking at peat alternatives to dilute down peat products for the horticultural sector. So I have another question from Carmen, and this is for you, Rosanna. She's asking, what does Rosanna mean when she says that she doesn't see fermentation technology / composting with cascading?
Well, that was from my research of the different technologies, and I just, for some of them, it was kind of more obvious how they could fit into a cascading system with either some technology before or after, but then for the composting and fermentation, I couldn't really figure out how it could work, and I didn't really I couldn't really see then any much research around having them in a cascading system. I think maybe some of the cascading is relatively new, and how technologies can work with each other. So it just wasn't really available, some of the information around that.
And I have a second question from Carmen. It's for you as well, Rosanna. She's asking, how did you manage to find information about how much waste is produced per crops? Did you do industry interviews or surveys?
Well, again, that was from our friends in ICT Biochain. They did a lot of interviews for their project, and then even for other projects, the Efficient Food project, they did even more interviews with food producers. So a lot of that, again, is from them. They produced a huge amount of data in that one project alone. And then they even have followed up with even more projects with even more useful data that we're still using. So yes, thank you, ICT Bio, Jane.
And we have a few comments, and I think there's one comment here that I should just read out. It's from Tony Callahan, and he's saying in relation to spread mushroom compost is carbon sequestration, soil fertilization is a good potential application for spread mushroom compost. There's no further processing needed with the material. Okay, if there's any more questions online, please send them in. I'll just see if there's any more kind of questions here. You know, there's a few comments, but you know, I'm looking for if you have some questions at home. I suppose I have one or two questions, and I suppose this is for Rosanna, and I have a fair idea what the answer is, but I know some people might know what it is. What is torrefaction?
I looked it up the last time you asked me, and then I think I've forgotten again. It was like a really complicated technology. Honestly, I can't remember. I could pretend, but I can't.
It's in the final report. Just as well, just we have another question here from the floor. So just introduce yourself.
My name is Noel Heffernan, EAPI. I've just received a comment to read out on behalf of someone else. It's not mine. And just to get your reaction to that, please.
Okay, if it's short and sweet and relevant
Yes,
to
course, yeah.
the work today, yeah.
So this comment is one of the biggest obstacles to any novel or new or well-proven technologies is the regulatory agencies. You can guess where this is going. Our experience is that there is an ultra-conservative mindset by regulators, planning, environment, and particularly the EPA, where they review the project in their specific prism to the exclusion of all others, the unintended, and then open brackets, or maybe intended, close brackets, consequences, stifles or rejects the project as it's the safest answer.
Yeah, thanks for a comment. I suppose when it comes to AD in particular, we have a number of regulatory agencies involved. You have, depending if it's a waste-based AD, there's local authority or an EPA license, and then there's also the Department of Agriculture role in regulated as a byproduct facility. So there are a number of people involved, a number of regimes to go through, and it'd be great if there might be less, but unfortunately, that's where we are at the moment. Unless anybody else wants to comment on that from the panel?
Just very briefly, I think kind of the regulation can be seen as either a barrier or an enabler, depending on how you're looking at it. So just in terms of, let's say, the spreading of digestate versus manure, that could be a key enabler for new industries that have to process, for example, cow manure before it's spread on land. So that could be a regulatory incentive to a whole sector, for renewable energy, for example.
Okay, another question from the audience. Just introduce yourself.
Jack again from Rediscovery Centre. It's just maybe building on that comment and maybe the other side of that. Might relate to the workshops you ran and the interviews. I was curious about if there were concerns among food producers in particular about where the value might accrue for this new value or increased value, if it's going to, or just business models so that it doesn't accumulate at potentially new operators operating capital intensive technology. So it's kind of about the equitability of distribution of value along that chain as well. Is there any comments or things that come up in the research around that?
Yeah, actually, thinking back to the workshop now, 2019, so it was a while ago, I don't think that really came up. They were talking about, it was more around the costs of dealing with the biomass, so not necessarily going as far as to think about what the business model would actually look like, but it's a fair question, and I think it's something that would need to be determined when you're taking, in the particular model, if you're taking a feedstock for free, processing it, getting a value out of that, it's rewarding essentially you need to think about it, I suppose, how everybody along the supply chain is going to get rewarded appropriately. Yeah, so it didn't necessarily come up as a concern in our early workshops, but I can certainly imagine that would be as these supply chains come closer to, I suppose, being implemented, those concerns are likely to come up.
We have another question from the online audience. So John Durkin is asking, did you look at carbon dioxide recovery?
Well, the easy answer, I think, is just no. We didn't really look at that yet. It didn't stand, because we did the characterization of the different biomasses, and it didn't really stand out as something in particular that we could be targeting or should be. But there's obviously scope for kind of adding these things into the project in the last few months of the project, so I can look at it now.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. I know I think in Cray, one or two members have talked about CO2 recovery from biogas and looking at that as potential. And I believe CO2 per ton, you get a quite good value off that. So that's where they could be using CO2 maybe in substituting and put it into fizzy drinks. The food industry, that's kind of where some people's train of thought are. So it'd definitely be something interesting to look at, Rosanna, if you have still time to do that. Let's just see, is there any other more questions from the online audience? I suppose one thing during the project I kind of noticed at the workshops is that there does seem to be a kind of genuine interest from some food companies and stuff looking at this whole area. It's like we have these what I might view as a waste, but actually could be a resource, and they do seem to be looking to engage, figure out what alternative could they do. And I suppose, Rosanna, without mentioning names of any companies, what's your kind of experience, or what's the kind of types of companies that are interested in the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting because it hasn't just been really large companies in the two counties that have been interested. It's been kind of smaller producers as well. And anyone all along the way. I think most people know, okay, we are producing some sort of waste, and think, well, surely we can either give this to somebody else to process it and get some value out of, or get value out of it ourselves. So I definitely think there's more of a push towards getting value out of wastes now. Even obviously where we are right now in the Rediscovery Centre, a lot of people would say, oh, there's an old bicycle, but actually maybe we can fix it up and somebody else will want it. So I think it's kind of, maybe it's a whole mindset that we're all changing now into looking at how else can we use things that are already existing, instead of just constantly buying new things, and maybe looking at what we have in a better light as well.
And if there's any final questions, we'll take one or two more. But I suppose one question I have for you, Rosanna, is pyrolysis. I think there's a few very small pyrolysis plants in Ireland. Is that the case, or what type of? I think there's one or two, I think, but a very small scale. Would that be right?
Yeah, I think so. Do you know how many pyrolysis there are in Ireland?
Yeah, it's currently commercial scale small. You mentioned there was one coming up in Gordon Amona. Yeah.
Yes, that's just when I was doing a bit of research, getting ready for this presentation. I found there was one being built in Offaly. So I think it was like on I don't remember now what newspaper it was on, but yeah, it sounds like it's kind of being built right now. Think somebody knows? Yeah.
Stephen Napier here from the Irish Bioeconomy Foundation. Firstly, congratulations on your work today, and sincere compliments to everything that you've managed to do so far. And in relation to pyrolysis, one of our members in the Irish Bioeconomy Foundation are Premier Green Energy, based in Thurles. They've got a small pilot scale pyrolysis plant, but they've also got a larger demonstration plant in Wales that they have advanced over the last while. So Sean O'Grady, as an engineer and his team at Premier Green Energy, do some fantastic work around that whole pyrolysis sector, and we can connect those in. I suppose my question to the team here would be that you've created some excellent work today. how would you like to see this work taken forward from here? Fast forward the next 3 to 5 years, I suppose I go back to in 2013. I was at an event promoting solar energy in the UK in 2013, and there was a full day dedicated to the gold rush in Ireland, where the incentives were about to come to build large-scale solar farms. And then we fast forward to 10 years, and those incentives have never came because the levelized cost of electricity has allowed that to happen. We just have a fear here at the moment in terms of anaerobic digestion because of what's happening in Russia and Ukraine and our energy prices, that when we come back to some sort of hopefully normality in the next number of years, that we don't miss this opportunity now, and we're still looking in the next 10 years of the great potential to come in anaerobic digestion in Ireland, because it's clear from your work that the feedstock is there and the infrastructure is there, but it's how we get to that next step. So I'd just like to kind of get your views of what would you like to see happen post-project here?
Thanks, Stephen. And I'll hand this over to Rosanna, maybe.
Yeah, I suppose the aim of this project was to provide essentially a blueprint to look at different regions where you can assess the biomass and then look at potential technology options. So based on the regions, AD has come up as a significant potential option that, you know, can be implemented now. Pyrolysis is a little bit further down the line, but AD certainly, you know, based on the research work carried out for the two regions in terms of the environmental benefits, there's clear environmental benefits of implementing AD. And there's a lot of development in the area. There's a number of projects rolling out AD plants across the country. What we would ideally like to see is other local authorities taking this approach, looking at the biomass that's available and looking at the AD potential in each county as well. And we'll be providing the economic and environmental benefits specific to the regions. But hopefully this information coming from the project will lead to additional interest. So from Sean's work, for example, showing that it works economically, but then also from the life cycle assessment, we can show that we can reduce emissions. Like agriculture is under significant pressure to reduce emissions. If we can implement AD and reduce emissions, then there's going to be a benefit for the agricultural sector, but also the energy sector as well. So hopefully by the results that we're disseminating and publishing by the end of the project, it'll add to that evidence base that AD makes sense from a variety of different points of view.
Yeah, I think so. The next part we're going to talk about the bioeconomy innovation blueprint. So that's kind of, I think that'll be actually really kind of impactful output of the project, and how other local authorities and counties can replicate what we've done. I think we also highlighted that we were missing the kind of fishery sector part. So obviously, but then that can also be done. Like the results can be repeated for kind of more coastal counties as well. But yeah, I think that's kind of going to be one of the main outputs. And obviously, kind of we've shown AD has a good future in Ireland, that cooperative systems probably work really well. We'd like to see more cascading systems, but I think maybe we're just not fully there yet. I think we need a lot more buy-in to that, but hopefully we can see more in the future.
Just to add very briefly, I think the work that Rosanna and Fionnuala mentioned that the ICT Biochain did, mapping the resources in kind of regions. I think if that was done at a national level, you can see there's already from government departments, there's already national strategies in terms of fertilizer, indigenous protein production as well. As you say, from the pressures from Russia, fertilizer, and Ukraine, with wheat supply, for example, and crop supply. So I think if it was done on a national level, mapping the bio-based resources, and just to say food waste as an example, it goes back to that question, can it be profitable at €120 per megawatt hour? If there's no grass silage, there are alternatives, that have very high volatile solid ratio percentages. That food waste, for example, there's no lack of food waste in the country, and I think that could be a very interesting and viable feedstock to look at for anaerobic digestion. I've heard it described as rocket fuel for AD. It's multiple volatile solid ratio, specific methane yield versus cow manure. So it's just very, very, it loves anaerobic digestion. It's very good.
Thanks, Sean. And I suppose what I'd add to that is, I suppose, yeah, there's a potential of 1 million tons of food waste in Ireland. We're only collecting maybe well under a quarter to a third of that. So yeah, a lot more rollout of food waste bins from householders and commercial sector is needed to Ireland for local processing in Ireland. There's, I suppose, one comment from Sean Fine in Arbia. He was saying some of his members have pyrolysis and torrefaction technology and are producing biochar, and are happy to discuss anybody who's interested in those technologies. I think we have a few more questions from the floor. So I think there's Pádraig. I'll go to Pádraig first.
Maybe a couple of comments just to clarify a few things. I think there's a danger sometimes, because I hear questions at events like this about grass and the availability of grass and feedstock. And I think what's happened in Northern Ireland is quite telling in relation to that, because during the period from, I think it was 2013 to 2019, or in around that period, there were tens of ADs built, significant scale, like these are large commercial scale. And at the same time, the size of the herd in Northern Ireland also increased by, I think it was 12%. Certainly there are studies available from last year which suggest that there's no, like there shouldn't be a shortage of feedstock in the form of grass. And I think that's an important takeaway message, because also at times like this, there's also a danger people get worried, well, will this not distract from food production? And again, the kind of recent studies in that area are saying, no, it shouldn't, as long as everything is reasonably well managed. And I think they're key takeaways. I suppose it was interesting to look at the comparison that Sean made from Germany. The one even though Germany is probably top of the list, and it's the one most people go for, the one I look at very often is Denmark, and the reason I do that is it's slightly behind Germany, but also it's a little bit more kind of comparison to the size of Ireland, but it's only marginally behind Germany. The Europeans have already said that Ireland has one of the best locations per capita to produce biomethane, and yet we have very little of it here. If we had a similar amount, Denmark, we'd almost be supplying almost 10% of our gas from biomethane at present. So these are kind of critical kind of issues that people need to understand in terms of the capability here. I suppose I liken biomethane to the development of the wind industry in Ireland. We came at it about 20 to 30 years too late, and the big value in terms of building an industry was left to Denmark. Now, if you compare Denmark to Ireland in terms of wind production, we're way ahead. Like Ireland is I think one of the third best locations for wind production in the world, and yet we let Denmark develop that industry and not here. We're now repeating the same mistake, 20 years on with anaerobic digestion and biomethane, as far as I'm concerned.
Thanks, Pádraig, for those comments. And Patrick, you want to ask a question?
So Patrick Barr from the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine. Just to come to Sean's point, so the Department of Agriculture has funded a project now called Inform Bio, which builds on the ICT biochain team and aligns Munster Technological University, NUI Galway, Teagasc and the CEO, looking at mapping, monitoring and modelling and monitoring the bioeconomy for Ireland. And that's going to look at scenario analysis and trying to provide depth and detail linked to how you would analyse both feedstocks and bio-based products and what's happening in Ireland. That's the first point. So I think that would be very useful, Sean, to inform the type of point that you were making. To come to the point about, I think, the development of the bioeconomy in Ireland, I think we shouldn't only consider sort of an outlook on bioenergy. We should strongly look at how we can optimize the use of our bioresources, particularly in light of climate action and rural and regional prosperity. And we run the risk, if we only consider technologies such as anaerobic digestion on their own, and we don't consider biorefining technologies alongside this, what we won't end up with the opportunity of trying to cascade the use of our resources. So probably a key message is to try and raise awareness of the technological opportunities. For example, and just one example, aligned with anaerobic digestion, we know that we can refine grass. Fionnuala is involved in a project, Farm for More. The department has funded a grass biorefinery project, and there's really interesting business cases there showing how this offers a sustainable opportunity for the dairy sector and a diversification opportunity for the meat sector. And that aligns up with their business. So I think that should be encouraged, that type of analysis, to look at multiple technologies aligned with enabling farmers and rural entrepreneurs to understand the skills and the training that they would need to bring this to the marketplace. Thank you, Percy.
Thanks, Patrick, for the very insightful comments there, and definitely a lot of it I would agree with. I'm just noticing the time here, and I think we'll just wrap up on the Q&A for the first three presentations. So, Sean, thank you very much for taking part and giving the presentation today, and Rosanna and Fionnuala as well. So thank you all very much for that. So I will just introduce to the stage Patrick Bard from Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine, and PJ McLaughlin from the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, if they'd like to join me here on the stage, where we're going to talk about the bioeconomy innovation blueprint. So this is, I suppose, where Rosanna has pulled together some comments and some views. It's very much draft, where we could maybe move on after the project. Where could other local authorities and key stakeholders look at trying to replicate some of the work that we've done in Tipperary and Monaghan, and how it could apply to their county. So Rosanna has a slide there. So Rosanna, I'll just hand it over to you to explain it.
Thank you very much. So I think we've kind of alluded to the bioeconomy innovation blueprint kind of across what we've been talking about today. So these are kind of steps that any local authority, any county could follow to develop their bioeconomy. So some of the steps follow steps we've already done in this project, and then other things that maybe we just didn't have time to do, or that kind of are just slightly outside the scope of the project itself. So one of the main things that I think we've kind of decided is determining what biomass do we have, what quantities, and what does it look like. We already know there's like a few different sources of data and information, from like Sensitive Agriculture, our project, the Inform Bio project. Then obviously just other things like, is it available for recovery, or is it already being used? Is there a stable supply? And what about storage, transport? Will we require any pre-treatment of the biomasses? So they're just kind of the basic things that just need to be sorted out first, I think, before we can really take a leap into identifying technologies and all the next steps, really. So obviously then technologies depends on what kind of biomass is available, what it looks like, and how much there is. Obviously trying to kind of move towards cascading systems. I think that even if a cascading system isn't possible right now, that we can kind of have it ready, so you're not just shutting off, that maybe something could be added later on in the process. If it's considered at the start, then it'll be much easier to do in later steps then. So then there's a few other projects. So the Bio-Based Industries Joint Undertaking projects. There's so many different projects, and you can look very easily at the different biomasses they have available for what projects we're looking at these biomasses, and then what the results are. We obviously have to engage local companies, especially the ones who actually own the biomasses and what they're doing with that, consult local enterprise offices, regional skills for IBEC, the local development network. And then communication networks obviously are always very important when you're trying to bring together different stakeholders. So we can help identify opportunities, nurture ideas, and get buy-in from the stakeholders. Especially what you mentioned earlier on about, well, who gets the actual value from the products at the end of the day, then obviously networks like this can help figure out a lot of that as well. Then we'd like to have an innovation sprint then to kind of push things forward and really actually get it going. So there's a few Irish innovation clusters that could help out with that. The IBF, who we have here today, BioConnect Centre, Circular Bioeconomy Cluster Southwest, the parts of Teagasc, and the Fisheries Board. Then Enterprise Ireland, and then all the third level institutions obviously want to get involved in this as well. And most people will know somebody else who wants to be working in this area and can collaborate with others. Developing awareness and competencies is always kind of a key thing as well. Maybe some people don't even realize that they are competent in a particular area relating to the bioeconomy. And maybe they just need to be trained up in a slightly different way, but a sidestep. And that can kind of come into the communication networks again. And then finally, obviously this can be done earlier on as well, feasibility and market analysis. So obviously have to make sure that everything is actually feasible on an environmental, social and economic scale. And then the market analysis to make sure there's actually a market there for the product they're producing. And we can see with just different developments that have been happening with COVID and now with Ukraine and Russia, that things change all the time, and things you didn't think were going to be profitable actually can be now, and that they're much more of a focus in just the entire public's eye as well. And we mentioned that cooperative systems seem to be, for Ireland, kind of one of the better ways of getting economies of scale and return on investment on different technologies that can be produced. So then we can just discuss some of these points now with our lovely panel.
Thanks, Rosanna, for giving us that overview. And really, I suppose we're kind of looking for people's view. This is a few kind of short, concise bullet points, how other people could maybe look at a blueprint of the bioeconomy in their county and how to go about that. So really, I'd open the floor to anybody in the room. If you have any questions or comments, or anybody online. So when you guys are considering your questions, I might just hand over to Patrick. And Patrick, you're very much involved in dealing with various stakeholders in your role in the department and talking to the various local authorities, regional authorities. And I suppose from this project, how do you see it moving on after the life of this project, in a local authority area? What would you kind of recommend to a local area what to do based on kind of the findings of this project, how to bring it forward?
So thanks very much, Percy, and thanks to the team for the invitation here today. So I suppose there's some key characteristics that we would like to achieve. And first of all, is that you have to structure bioeconomy development. And that means that because it's going to be a highly collaborative process where you want to have different people using resources in a more optimal manner, adding value and distributing that value across the value chain may be different than is done today, because if we do that, it might drive towards improved climate action or environmental sustainability or regional welfare or prosperity. So what we need to be able to do is to say to either at regional assembly level or at say a clustering level, which is kind of at NUTS 3, or at a local authority level, how can you structure an approach? So we need to be able to get farmers, rural entrepreneurs, regional entrepreneurs, SMEs, industries, people who are engaged in enabling activities such as the technological universities or the universities themselves, who can provide knowledge or education or training and skills type services to combine, because it's going to be a cross-cutting activity. So it's how do you bring this combination together? And we think that the local authorities are well placed, or for example, the regional enterprise plan level, where this kind of structure already exists, to leverage structures that are in place and to use them to try and develop the bioeconomy, and then to take like a stepwise approach that's proposed here, which I think constructively takes you through what resources you have, what technologies you could consider, and how to then engage with funding opportunities to bring that into action from a small validation level through to how you integrate research, to how you pilot and scale that up, and eventually bring it to commercial level. And the state can play a role in that. So that's my opening sort of idea, Percy. Structure, that's the main point. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick, for those comments. And definitely, it's all about collaboration as well, really, working with the various stakeholders. PJ, thanks so much for joining us here today. You're representing Stable Energy Authority of Ireland. And PJ, obviously from SEI's point of view, the whole biomass and energy is kind of a hot topic at the moment. And I suppose with the current situation around energy and stuff, what's the latest trends or latest developments around biomass and using for heat? Or I think there was a recent study you guys did around that as well. Would like to make any comments about that?
Thanks, Percy, and thanks a million for the invite as well. So, yeah, in SEI, it's as part of the Energy Efficiency Directive, we had to conduct a national comprehensive assessment of heating and cooling options in Ireland. And our parent department, DEC, actually asked us to do this, which is the National Heat Study. So as part of the National Heat Study, there was 7 work streams, and there was a bioenergy work stream that I led on. So in that, then we analysed bioenergy's role into the decarbonisation by 2050. So so we would have looked at solid biomass, so forestry and sawmill waste. We would have looked at one of the big areas that we analysed was anaerobic digestion and its role that it could play in that. So we've done extensive spatial analysis, I suppose, is the big distinction with biomethane that was conducted as part of that. So it was more, we utilised DAFM's, their animal movement database and their land parcel database to create a kind of a spatial bottom-up analysis of that. So from that, we're able to conclude that in one of the scenarios, we modeled different scenarios within that, but our most ambitious scenario that we modeled, we quantified that biomethane could have about 5.7 terawatt hours. Just for context, I suppose, gas at the moment is about 52 terawatt hours. And of that, grass silage could be about 4.7. So there's a lot in it. There's a big report. There's 7 reports, I think, in the National Heat Study altogether, and there's a report on sustainable bioenergy for heat as well. So there's a lot on it.
Thanks, PJ. Tell us about that study, and if there's any questions from the floor, Pádraig, just introduce yourself again.
We get first call on the mic as I'm at the back of the room here. First of all, I think the heat study is an extensive study. I would have some concerns about it. I think the figures in relation to biomethane, as was one of the concerns we have with the approach taken, was they excluded the dairy sector, and we would feel like the slurry from the dairy sector is a key feedstock actually that would have to be included there. Now, I'm not going to go as far as, I think at the recent climate summit in Croke Park, the heat study was described as bonkers. I wouldn't go as far as that, but there are aspects of that study which we have serious concerns about. And I suppose the reason I say serious concerns is because this is now going to be used as the kind of blueprint for various departments, more particularly the Department of Energy. And I would have concern about that type of study and some of the information out of it getting into the hands of the department. And they're saying, oh, this is legit situation. I think so. I think it could undermine a number of developments. I suppose also we have to be realistic about the fact that there is a blueprint already here for developing industries. Whether you like it or not, I think the wind industry is a very good example. We would see it as a success over the last 20, 25 years. But if we compare where we are with that industry, the first wind farm was built in 1992 in Bellacorrick, I think combination of Bordemone and ESB. It took about 5 years before the next plant was built. So the first biomethane plant that was built and connecting and injecting gas into the grid was at the end of 2019 or 2020. And to be honest, we are probably 2 or 3 years away from seeing the next one being built. So there is a possibility that we could be following the same track. The only problem is, if I compare Ireland to, say, Netherlands, in the Netherlands, they've changed the way they offer contracts to the wind industry, and what they now say is, well, if you're reducing carbon output, we'll offer you the same type of contract. So it's really good to have all the cooperation and coordination within the country, because this is an area that affects agriculture, affects energy, it affects food processing. It can be a real contribution to the economy in a number of ways and benefit the climate action journey that we all have to go on. And I think that's critically important. What seems to be missing here is in the policy area. Unlike Holland, where they now offer 15-year contracts to biomethane and anaerobic digesters. And again, it's technology agnostic, which was a very good point made earlier by Patrick. I think I'd agree with that. But the problem is we're not technology agnostic. We offer contracts as a country at the moment for wind farms and for solar, which is welcome, but we should be broadening our scope there. So I suppose there's a question at the end of all this long tirade, which is, I suppose, really, given that this area impacts, agriculture, transport, and energy, but it seems to be energy are the department holding the whip hand here, because they seem to be the only ones kind of offering incentives to the sectors that they're interested in. Is there any prospect of a cross-departmental working group on this particular area?
I think I might just make one or two comments there. If any panelists want to come in, they can. I suppose really we're all kind of hoping that there will be a positive decision around renewable heat obligations proposal that was consulted on later at the end of last year, where that probably will hopefully be an incentive to develop a biomethane industry in Ireland. And we're expecting that decision to be sometime soon, where there'll be either agreement in principle or not to have such a scheme, and then it'll go, if it is positive, then go into kind of a design stage. And there's definitely plenty of opportunities for the biomethane industry in Ireland, and particularly around the agricultural sector, where there's plenty of feedstocks. So if any panelists like to make a comment?
Yeah, so I'll just pick up on a couple of points. So first of all, there is a cross-government group on the bioeconomy that involves 8 departments and 11 agencies. And I suppose it's a new policy area, and there's a lot of learnings and probably a lot of growing up going on while people are meeting. So, but to complement that, there has been a bioeconomy forum in place over the last year, and the interesting thing about that is it has 33 members from, I suppose, sectors that produce biological resources: agri, forestry, marine, horticulture, etc. Sectors that process biological resources, and they're quite a significant number, with new emerging areas like insect protein, bio-based fertilizers, etc. Then you have a whole range of complementary groups, such as the group Percy is involved in with Cray and Quilcha, other groups, and then a range of sort of supporting services from rural and regional areas. So that's in place, and that has been consulting and will report to government in June this year, all with the idea of developing a bioeconomy action plan later on this year. But I suppose the other thing that I wanted to comment on, we have been working closely with the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, for example, to offer a research opportunity this year, because we think there's a clear need to align the renewable energy sector and its developments, the bioeconomy and nature, because we shouldn't forget nature in all of this. We have to, if we're going to talk about a bioeconomy or bioenergy industry, we need to ensure that our land and marine ecosystems are still there to aid us in terms of climate action, to be there to support society. And this is clearly something. So this is something through the good partnership that's already in place with the SEAI and DAFM, looking at this as a research opportunity. And I suppose the final thing that I'd just like to mention is it's very noticeable how we do support a biofuel. There's a biofuel obligation and support there. So there's a support for renewable heat coming down the line. And food and feed are very well regulated areas, but we don't in any way in our economy or across Europe, as far as I'm aware, support bio-based materials and bio-based chemicals. Because what's increasingly clear under climate action is, as you decrease the use of fossil fuels, we will need to have sources of renewable carbon within our economy for materials, for advanced materials, for use in pharmaceuticals, for use in packaging, bio-based plastics, etc. And if we don't design our economy by supporting these types of industries to develop, our economy will run short of these materials. So there's a clear need for policy to look at this area. So thanks, Percy.
Yeah, so just to address some of your questions there, Pádraig. So, so as part of the National Heat Study for the bioenergy workstream, we had an advisory group that our parent Department of Energy would sit on. DAFM also sat on that advisory group, EPA and Teagasc. And I mean, SEI were not the agricultural experts, so we would take advice from both Teagasc on agricultural analysis and obviously DAFM on agricultural policy. So I suppose that's the first point. At your point about dairy slurry, I mean, well, we would have looked at dairy slurry, but we didn't actually look at dairy farms because, you know, with the advice from DAFM, our dairy herd is actually going to be stable for the next 30 years. So we only looked at beef farms for the National Heat Study. So that's why I suppose the reason why dairy slurry wasn't included was because, as Sean would have pointed out, there's a spatial analysis there. You can't transfer lots of wet slurry basically long distances. And then your comparison with wind, to the best of my knowledge, the only thing you can do with wind is create energy, whereas with land you have other competing areas. So again, it kind of comes back to aligning with agricultural policy. We have to take, I mean, there's enough land to create probably 52 terawatt hours of biomethane, but unfortunately you won't have an agricultural sector. So we have to align with agricultural policy. So that's what we have to do for the National Heat Study. Yeah.
Thanks, PJ and Patrick. We have a question online from the online audience, and I'll try and paraphrase the question. It's following on from Stephen Napier's question about post-project steps or wishes. This person was wondering who's going to be driving turning theory into practice. Tipperary seems a natural starting point. You know, should there be a plot or pilot to test the theory to be replicated in other countries? So should we, with the research from that we've done in Tipperary and Monaghan, should we be trying to activate other kind of groups in other counties to kind of explore and look at what we've done in Tipperary and Monaghan? So maybe I'll hand that to Fionnuala to make a comment about how to roll out in other counties.
Sure, yeah. So I suppose as the university partners in the project, we're interested in, I suppose, developing further collaboration. So as Rosanna mentioned a few times, we've worked with MTU on this project. They've brought in information from ICT Biochain and are building on that with Inform Bio. So that's an extremely important part of our strategy. We're bringing it forward into larger projects, for example, within the Bioeconomy Research Centre. So we're looking, from our point of view, we're doing the analysis here, and we would like to partner with more local authorities to take this further. Beyond that, I think that kind of feeds into, I suppose, maybe Stephen's work in the Irish Bioeconomy Foundation. There have been efforts to develop the bioeconomy, and certainly a hub for the bioeconomy in Lachine and Tipperary. So I think it is a very important step that we get the pilot facilities there, because as you're developing any sort of technology. So this project, ABC Economy, it was a desk-based study. So we were taking information from other projects where they had established, we'll say, technologies. But if you're looking at bioeconomy innovation and you're developing new technologies, then there is that, we'll say, valley of death, I suppose, once you get, first of all, to the pilot stage and then up to demonstration. So it's very important that you get those facilities in place. And I think that comes from collaboration across universities, across industry as well. It's very important.
So I think what we would encourage people, the government have put in place funds called the Project Ireland 2040 Fund. So there's a Rural Regeneration Fund, there's a Disruptive Technologies Fund, there is a Climate Action Fund, even though it's just at this stage only been, I think, opened on one occasion. And we would see these as vehicles to allow people at rural and regional level to collaborate together, to combine with the with the universities and the technological universities, and which can provide funding for both, I suppose, people working in academia and people working in industry to work together and to combine with local authorities. Sometimes, like in rural regeneration, it actually has to be local authority led. So we see those funds as being essential. We also see European co-funds such as Interreg and LIFE as being important. And we saw where the Department of Environment and Climate and the last round of LIFE funding was offering co-funding opportunities. You had to go through a sort of a process to be approved for this, so you had to reach an acceptable level. And then there's also the European bioeconomy funding that goes through cycles of innovation. So there's research and innovation level, that's up to TRL 3, 4, 5. Then there's piloting and demonstration opportunities, TRL 5 to 7, and then flagship opportunities, which allows you to develop projects to pre-commercial level. So one of the things is to make people aware of all these funding opportunities, and then it's to put them into collaborative groups and to work with people who can help them prepare appropriate proposals. And hopefully, by being successful with these funding opportunities, we then bring activity on the ground that demonstrates and probably deals with some of the technical and maybe economic challenges that would be there, that projects can all furl as they scale up. And what we need in Ireland is we need year on year to have a number of these taking place. And it's only when we get to this core that it'll really be demonstrated, I suppose, to the incumbent industries and to new emerging industries that this is possible. And I suppose that should be probably an aim of the Bioeconomy Action Plan period, is to get these number of projects in place.
Thanks, Patrick. And it's sometimes we forget about all the funding opportunities out there. So thanks for kind of reminding about all those different funds out there. We just have a few minutes left, but I'm going to go back and get people's view about what Rosanna has pulled here together in these 7 points in the Bioeconomy Innovation Blueprint. And just as it was really like this has been drafted, we're looking for comments and feedback from everybody here and online, and also from the panelists here as well. Is there any kind of changes or tweaks people might have they'd like to see changes in these 7 steps, or is there any additional steps that they would like to see included in this kind of draft kind of blueprint? So I don't know, does any, Patrick or PJ, would you have any kind of views or any kind of other additional points or different additional steps you'd like to see included in this, or anybody here in the room? And I'll let Tony go first. Yeah.
One thing that's not mentioned is markets. If you want people to invest, we can do all the nice research, we can go through pilot, but you're not going to go over the next step unless there's market certainty. And that generally, within the bioeconomy, is coming from policy. So you need policy to drive a market. So how do we do that? We don't need subsidies. I would say we don't need, as a bio industry, we don't necessarily, apart from energy, not my thing, we don't need subsidies, we need market certainty. Give us market certainty, we'll deliver the product.
Yes, so I suppose one of the areas around market certainty that we have been engaging with our colleagues in the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Environment and Climate is around green procurement policy, where there may be opportunities where the quite large government spend every year that's made on goods and services could be aligned with development of purchase of bio-based products or development of the bioeconomy. So that's certainly one area. Another area could be a matter of looking at, say, product labeling, where you could steer markets towards and consumers towards buying bio-based products by very clearly understanding maybe the environmental benefits, or driving their preferences towards more sustainable opportunities. From a business-to-business perspective, I suppose there could be, I think there's opportunities for analysis within companies to understand maybe some of the materials that they may be using that they may need to design out of their systems, and that could and policy maybe could aid companies, such as through climate toolkits maybe, which have been put in place over the last year, to undertake that type of analysis and then to look towards sort of other market alternatives that may be there, and that could also be an aid to the bioeconomy. So if I was to pick 3 areas, I think that would be maybe some of my starting points.
Thanks, Patrick, for that feedback, and definitely, I suppose it's always about ensuring that there's sustainable quality markets at the end for any type of product, and that will help encourage the development of the sector. We have a comment here from the floor. Just want to introduce yourself.
Noel Heffernan, EAPI. I also wear another hat for the Tipperary Green Business Network. And just through them, I just want to give this as an example that I became aware of this exercise. And I think that's where maybe some more work needs to go in at state level and at county council, local authority levels, that are making people aware of products that could potentially be coming out of the whole bioeconomy sector, making people aware that there may be alternative raw materials or someplace that they may be able to look at. So it's just going back to the word networking, which I just came from there. I think perhaps there needs some energy or resources be put into that to make people aware of more of what's going on. Sometimes people are looking for the right answer, but in the wrong place. There's probably a better way of saying that. I think that's really the message I'd like to give to you. That, you know, if you don't look around enough, you may never find what you're actually looking for.
Yeah, I agree totally with you there. I know it's all about awareness and where the opportunities are. And, you know, if you're a food company, you have a certain waste stream, is there other value-added products or byproducts that could be taken from that that you hadn't considered originally? And, you know, one good example that I always refer to is Mead Potato Company or Vegetable Company in County Meath, where they had a lot of kind of out-spec kind of potatoes that couldn't be sold to the supermarket chains, and they found by which I always say, which I thought was very good, is they hired a researcher in for a short period of months, focusing on, well, we have these waste potatoes, you know, is there any other alternatives, other products we could develop as a business? And from that research, they found out that they could develop kind of a starch-based material, which they're siding out into the food industry. I think also maybe into the cosmetic industry. So a number of jobs and local jobs have been created from that. So what I always kind of say to companies is, you know, try and get involved with student projects, try and look out there to do some of the initial work to see, well, what alternatives are out there abroad or locally or nationally, where other byproducts with added value, higher value, could be produced that we hadn't kind of thought of initially. So that's where I think being involved with colleges and other kind of key stakeholders will give you a good idea, some ideas what to look at. We're just on time here, so from the panel, if any more comments or from anybody from the panel, and then we're going to wrap up. So anybody else, any final comments they'd like to say, or PJ, maybe I'll start off with you. You know, we're very grateful for the funding support from SEI, so thank you all very much for that. And the guidance throughout the project it's been great. There was another person initially involved in the project when we started 1 or 2 years ago, wasn't that it? So PJ, from your point of view and the SCI point of view, you know, with this research, what would you like to see happen to the research kind of going forward in the future, what we've learned here? Or any comment you might have?
Thanks, Percy. Yeah. Well, going forward, so one of the things that Patrick would have touched on there is kind of strategies in local authorities. So in SEI, we'd actually work with local authorities through local authority renewable energy strategies. So we create a framework for that. So definitely going forward, something like this would be beneficial to help local authorities so that they can identify their bioresource and, that they can identify bioeconomy in their regions. Just from our perspective in bioenergy and bioeconomy, we would consider that bioenergy is a part of the bioeconomy, that there is that they align very well, that if good markets are created for bioeconomy, it's also very good for bioenergy because it's good for bioeconomy in total. So there's great alignment there. Bioenergy is very much underdeveloped in Ireland, so anything that can improve that in its market, like the example I use a lot for bioenergy is Scotland. When the RHI came in, we'll say that forestry residue that would have stayed on the ground, sawmills then started taking that in, then the sawmill residues that went out and into the commercial markets, and so that's an example of good functioning market. So absolutely, there's huge alignment there between bioenergy and bioeconomy.
Bruno, would you like any final comments on the project?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank the funders, Staffin and SAI, for the opportunity to do this project, and to all the stakeholders who've come to the various different workshops. It's been really interesting. We've learned a huge amount over the course of this project, and it's been really important to get the views of the stakeholders. As a university, so we're doing the, I suppose, research behind the project, but it's really important to know, and especially from the first workshop, what biomass resources are available, what people think can be done with it, and what the barriers are, so we can bring that into our research and really work collaboratively. It gives us a way better impact to the project. Working with Tipperary County Council and Monaghan County Council has been a massive benefit. So I'd just like to thank everybody for participating in the project. Thanks to Rosanna and Sean for their presentations today and excellent research in the project.
Patrick, any final comments?
Yeah, I think my final comment for on the innovation blueprint would be to maybe ask if some steps could be considered under each point to turn it from a sort of an action into a process. And then finally, I just like to say thank you to the team. I think they've done an excellent job. I really like the way they engaged with the stakeholders and worked with the local authorities, because it brought research to action. And it's a difficult task going from a desktop analysis of technologies and trying to paint a picture. But it's all about raising awareness, as our colleague from the Green Business Network said. We need to raise awareness about the opportunity, about how bioeconomy can be part of the climate action response. And finally, just to say thank you to our co-funders in SEAI who really run a very good project process, and it's a pleasure to work with them. So thanks very much, everyone.
Rosanna?
Yeah, obviously just want to thank our funders again, SEAI and Staffin. I found through working on the project that we've been quite supported, especially by Patrick, has been really helpful in kind of sending the message of our project out and telling other people about our project, telling us about other projects so we can help with other people who we can collaborate with. I think it's been really great to be like properly supported by different people in particular and different organizations. Yeah, it's been a really enjoyable project to work on. And I'm kind of sad now we're actually wrapping up for the final workshop.
My colleague Irene will probably kill me if I don't mention it, but the RD&D call that this project went through, it's still open until next Monday as well. So, and there's a call there's another bioeconomy call co-funded with DAFM as well. So then I better mention it.
Well, I suppose from Craig's perspective, very much enjoyed working with the UCD and the various stakeholders. Particularly also want to thank Paul Clifford in Monaghan County Council and Anthony Fitzgerald in Tipperary County Council as project collaborators as well, and very much thank for their support. And very much like to thank Irene and PJ for their funding support from the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, and to Patrick Barrett as well from the Department of Agriculture and Food for their funding support as well. But also, as Patrick said, for all the stakeholders who joined us here today, online and the various workshops we've had during the lifetime of the project. So thank you all for taking part. And copies of the presentations and a recording of this event will be available tomorrow to everybody. So we'll email links about it. So thank you all very much for participating here today. And thank you all very much. Thank you. Bye.